We're in the second week in a series in Nehemiah. And like I said, Nehemiah is this incredible picture of the walls and the gates of Jerusalem being rebuilt by Nehemiah. But it's a picture that's not just about a historical occurrence. It's not just about these character traits that Nehemiah had to accomplish this great task. It's really a picture of a place that God wanted to renew and restore. We called this the pathway to renewal, the pathway to spiritual renewal. Jerusalem was always the place where it was the city that God chose to place the temple. It was a place where God dwelt. We know that when Jesus died, that he rent the curtain of the temple, and there was no temple anymore that was on this earth other than us. He says in 1 Corinthians 6, you now are the temple. And so this idea of spiritual renewal is, as we look at Nehemiah and we see all that's happening, we look at our lives and see whatever brokenness exists there, God wants to renew and restore. So it's this beautiful symbolism of what God is doing spiritually within the place where God dwells. So I want to take you there, and I want you to be thinking about this. I was thinking about the word renewal itself. Doesn't it sound good? Renewal. I mean, it's this sense of something that was kind of broken and something that's beautiful again. Doesn't that feel good? You know, that feels good until you realize the path to get there. The path is kind of rough at times to get to that place of renewal. I remember when we bought our house not too many years ago, and we bought this house it was the worst house in the best location. And they always say that's kind of what you want to do. Although with that statement, it was daunting. There were all kinds of issues. I mean, we walked through it and we were like, well, it could look like this. You know, if we do this, every space, every area needed to be redone. But we had a dream. We had a dream that it could be beautiful. And so we decided we're going to take the leap. And I remember when we were signing the papers on the loan agreement, all these fears started to creep in. It's like, well, is this the right decision? What if there's more, behind the scenes that's unknown and it's going to cost us more than we can afford? And what if? And I call it the what if syndrome, that it just paralyzes you in that moment. But we said, okay, we're still going to sign it. There's no turning back. And we signed those papers. And I'm here to tell you that it's a continual process. That as we work through some things, when we got them to where they should be, then we're working on something else. And that's the beautiful picture of home ownership. Well, as we look at Nehemiah, the reality is we're going to see that renewal was this beautiful idea, but there had to be this point of commitment to get there. It didn't just happen. There were going to be all kinds of fears coming against him that he would have to face. And so I want to take you to this passage, and I want you to see, as this unfolds, Nehemiah's story and really our story of renewal. Nehemiah chapter 2, verses 1 through 8. It says, in the month of Nisan, in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes, when wine was before him, I took the wine and I gave it to the king. Now I had not been sad in his presence. And the king said to me, why is your face sad, seeing that you are not sick? This is nothing but sadness of heart. Then I was very much afraid, and I said to the king, let the king live forever. Why should not my face be sad when the city, the place of my father's graves, lies in ruins? Its gates have been destroyed by fire. Then the king said to me, "What are you requesting?" So I prayed to the God of heaven, and I said to the king, "If it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favor in your sight, that you send me to Judah, to the city of my father's graves, that I may rebuild it." And the king said to me, with the queen sitting beside him, "How long will you be gone, and when will you return?" Sounds like me talking to my kids. So it pleased the king to send him when I had given him a time. And I said to the king, "If it please the king, let letters be given to me for the governors of the province beyond the river, that they may let me pass through until I come to Judah. And a letter to Asaph, the keeper of the king's forest, that he may give me timber to make beams for the gates of the forest of the temple, and for the wall of the city, and for the house that I shall occupy." And the king granted me what I asked, for the good hand of my God was upon me. Isn't that beautiful? We're going to unpack this a little, and I want to show you 3 key things that I believe were critical in this process, this pathway of renewal. The first one is this, that facing our brokenness can be risky. Facing our brokenness can be risky. Let's look at Nehemiah here. For him to face the brokenness that existed in Jerusalem, he was going to put a lot on the line. The one thing that you never would do is you never would be sad in the presence of the king. Why? Because it could cost you dearly. It could cost you your life. Nehemiah knew that as the cupbearer, this prominent position, this place of status that he had achieved, that could be gone in a spoken word, that his life could be eliminated in a spoken word. You don't want to be sad in the king's presence. The king would do many things. He'd bring people in just to make them happy. And yet here it says that he saw sadness in the face of Nehemiah. I believe that most people avoid brokenness in our own lives because we're afraid of the risk involved. We think about it, we calculate it, and we go, well, if I do that, some bad things could happen. And I talk to people all the time, and I say, well, have you spoken to them? You don't understand. If I speak to them about it, then, this could happen or that could happen, or there's risk involved in dealing with brokenness. And here we see that on display. Like Nehemiah, facing our brokenness will take courage. Why? Because we're facing fear of something, and that's the risk. Risk is when we put something on the line. I was thinking about Nehemiah. His job was at stake. His life was at stake. All of these things were at stake. But what about us when we step into broken places within our life? If we have a broken relationship, if we have something broken in a sin pattern or shame within us, whatever it is that's broken within us, if we're going to step into that, there's a risk. And we have fear that comes up. And I think one of the fears, maybe the biggest one, is what are people going to think? We work hard as a society to put an image out there of what people think about us. We care about that. And if that changes, if somebody thinks poorly of me, I'm going to guard against that. And that's the fear sometimes of stepping into our brokenness, is people are going to think differently about me. So also, what if it doesn't work? I mean, Nehemiah, he's stepping into this, and he doesn't know the king's going to befriend him and do anything positive here. What if it doesn't work? Pastor, I stepped into my brokenness and no good came out of it. What if it damages relationships? You see how this works? I want you to see this, that when we look at our brokenness, we are faced with all of these fears that come against us. What if this happens? What if that happens? This could happen. And so what happens is we stay at a distance from our brokenness. The truth is, facing our brokenness is risky. It's putting something on the line. Another aspect of risk here, I find this interesting. Nehemiah trusted the friends that came and told him about Jerusalem. They came back and they said, hey, this is the deal with Jerusalem. The walls are broken down. The gates are burned with fire. People are in shame. It's just deplorable what is happening there. It's in terrible shape, terrible condition. Nehemiah didn't have his eyes on it. He didn't see it. He had to trust the words of these friends, these trusted friends that came and shared the news. And I want you to hear this because I know it can be subtle, but man, there's some power in this. Sometimes our brokenness is seen clearer by others than it is ourselves. And we need to trust when they speak of brokenness that could exist within us or around us or that we're involved in, that we need to take pause and go, oh, I didn't know that. I didn't see that. I wasn't aware of that. And so there's this risk with that, right? Can I trust them? I had a buddy one time speak to me. I remember years and years ago, he spoke to me about something. I looked him in the eyes and I said, you're wrong. And I walked away and I thought, oh, this guy is my closest friend. I can trust him with anything. Why would he lie to me? So I ended up taking pause and really considering what he said, and then I followed what he said, even though I didn't feel it. I didn't want to believe it. But I found that it was the most important decision that I made at that point in my life, was trusting the friend that could see my brokenness better than I could myself. The third thing about risk here is facing our brokenness can be risky. It's going to cost us something. Sometimes we need to trust those around us that are close to us. But there's another aspect, and that is that we need to step into it. It's risky because we need to step into this brokenness. We need to take initiative. I find this to be true is we as humans are usually waiting for the perfect moment. You talk about a broken relationship, and I'll say, have you spoken to so-and-so? No, I'm waiting for the right moment. Good luck. I'm here to declare to you that moment doesn't exist. There's no perfect moment to step into brokenness. I think there's a wrong moment when you're rash and you're just like a bull in a china shop walking in and going, well, I need to deal with this. Oh, who are you and what is this about? No, that's not wise. But if we become paralyzed by waiting for the perfect moment, the sky to part, a picture of Jesus, all the clouds to form some word. That's sometimes, it's almost weird that way. We're like, I don't know, it just hasn't been the right time. We won't deal with our brokenness if we're always waiting for the right time. I think it's actually the enemy of renewal. So we see these things, but we begin this passage with seeing this reality of risk, this risk that Nehemiah had to understand and be willing to step into to deal with the brokenness that existed in Jerusalem. And for you and I, our brokenness, I guarantee you, if you consider whatever brokenness could be real in your life right now, there is a risk in stepping into it. There is a risk involved. There's a fear involved in stepping into it. So number 2 is important. Number 2, as we go down through this passage, we see that facing our brokenness will require a belief that God is greater than what we're facing. Nehemiah didn't throw up a last-minute prayer, kind of throwing it up, going, God, you just need to help me, and let's see if we can make it through. He saturated all of this in prayer. It was actually about 4 months since he heard word of what happened in Jerusalem by these friends, and he took time and he prayed and he sought the Lord and he planned and he prepared that if God prompted him, he was going to step into this moment. And here his life was on the line. He steps into this moment. The king says, why are you sad? And he doesn't go, oh, king, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to do that. He put it out there. He shared it. And as we look at these things, I want you to see this beautiful phrase that as the king begins to respond to Nehemiah in verse 4, there's a statement that I think is just profound. And we'll start actually in verse 2, just so you get the gist of it. And it says, the king said to me, why is your face sad, seeing you are not sick? This is nothing but sadness of heart. Then I was very much afraid, and I said to the king, let the king live forever. It's always a good way to start. Why shouldn't my face not be sad when the city, the place of my father's graves, lies in ruins and its gates have been destroyed by fire? Then the king said to me, what are you requesting? This is the phrase I think often gets just skipped over. So I prayed to the God of heaven. And then he continues. So I prayed to the God of heaven. You see, the courage to face his fears and to risk everything was rooted in his belief that God was greater than the risk involved, than the fear that he was facing, than the king himself. He knew that God had to be greater. Otherwise, he would never have stepped into that. So true. And I believe our spiritual beliefs will determine our spiritual actions. God is greater. Our spiritual belief in that has to be rooted deep because these fears are real. The brokenness is real. All of this is so real that we're not going to, no, I'm not going to step into it because this could happen, that could happen. You know, the fallout and all of that. Do you believe that God is big enough, strong enough, powerful enough, gracious enough, kind enough to bring renewal to your brokenness? You see, facing our brokenness is risky. And facing our brokenness will require belief that God is greater than what you're facing. And then the last thing is that facing our brokenness will allow us to see the power of God on display. We get to see the power of God on display. Sometimes we say, well, I can't step into this because of this or that. Listen, when we step in, that's the beginning of God doing his greatest work. You look all throughout the Bible and what happens. You know, Jesus says to Peter, come walk on the water. He goes, no, he stepped out on the water. He's walking on the water. God told Moses to step into the Red Sea. And what happens? Until he steps in, it doesn't part. The Jordan River, the same thing. It's that moment of decision and commitment, that initiation of taking the first step that God does his work. So we need to passionately pray, knowing that God will provide all that's needed to resource his renewal. I was thinking about this because I find within Christianity, a lot of times we catch ourselves in these spiritual moments where we say, well, I'm just praying through it. And I believe in that because we see that in Nehemiah. He prayed, he planned, he prepared, all of that. But then he had to step into this brokenness. He had to risk it all. He put it on the line. He put himself out there believing that God had to show up. I was meeting with this individual one day, and we were sitting at their dining room table, and they were sharing with me about all these broken things within their family that they just were frustrated over. And so I talked to them. I said, have you done this or that? And they go, no, I'm just bathing it in prayer. I go, that's a good choice. How long you been bathing it in prayer? Long time. When are you going to step into it? I don't know. I'm just bathing it in prayer. So riddled by fear that there was not the ability to believe that God would show up in that moment. So I looked at him and I said, in our conversation, you mentioned that you wanted your house to be painted, that it was looking pretty rough. Yep. I said, this is my advice to you. Just pray about it. Just keep praying about it. Don't call a painter. Don't do anything. I don't want you to put a scraper in your hand. You just keep praying about it. One day you're going to walk out of your house and poof, it's going to be beautiful. She goes, well, that's stupid. I said, so isn't the way you're handling this. Brokenness doesn't solve itself. It's risky, it's scary, it takes courage to step into it. We need to bathe it and saturate it in prayer, but there comes this moment where, well, I need to step into it. Listen, husbands and wives, don't avoid the brokenness in your relationship. Step into it, talk about it. Work on it. Believe that God can renew and make better what is broken. And your families, the same thing. We need to believe that God will show up and provide for the renewing of these things. I want you to see for Nehemiah, the first thing with Nehemiah, a couple notations here, is that he had a plan. The king asked him, how long are you going to be gone? He didn't go, oh, man, should have thought of that. He had a plan, 4 months. He had prepared for this moment, didn't know when it was going to occur, but when it did occur, he was ready to step in. He had processed, put it before the Lord, prayed about it, planned for it. And he answered the king. And then he told the king, this is what I need. It was interesting. Nehemiah knew what he needed, but he had no ability to provide it. Isn't that the way our brokenness works? Is we can see the problem, the brokenness, and the need, but we can't fix it. Only God can. You see, God had to show up to supply everything needed for Nehemiah because he had no ability to resource this plan. But you know what's cool is God did show up. He did provide everything. It says here in this passage that from beginning to end, he provided the resources needed, a letter of safe passage, timber. I love this, the timber for the rebuilding, even of his house. This is cool. He goes, it's not just for the walls and the gates and all of that. Hey, man, when I'm there, I need a house. I need some extra timber for my house, so I can have a place to stay while I'm there. Well, God said, I'm going to use the resources of this world to accomplish the work in my city that I want to restore and renew and rebuild. God is not limited with what we have in our hands. God can move the heart of kings. He can make quail come down from heaven. And let me tell you, when we're serious and we put our brokenness before Him, God is not slack or any lack of ability to fulfill everything that is needed to renew what is needed in our life. He doesn't lack anything. I just thought that was cool. I want to take you to the last verse, maybe the most powerful statement in the whole passage, to remind us of some things here. And it says in verse 8, the end of it, "And the king granted me what I asked, for the good hand of my God was upon me." I mean, is that good or what? The good hand of my God was upon me. When we step into these moments, when we bathe them in prayer, when they're rooted in a belief that God is greater than the risk I'm taking, than the fear I'm facing, than the people that I'm confronting, good things, amazing things, godly things can happen. It's powerful. The good hand of my God was upon me. So I want to challenge us with a couple questions. Let's just consider this as we wrap this up. What fears arise when you consider your brokenness? What fears arise? I'm talking about if it's a marriage, if it's in your family, if it's in your workplace, if it's with an addiction, if it's whatever it is. If I come out and I talk about this, there's got to be some real fears. Some people, there might be stuff going on that you're afraid, how are people going to perceive me? What are they going to say about me? What if it doesn't work out? What if we have all of those? What fears arise when you consider your brokenness? Are you willing to face those fears to see renewal occur? Just remind yourself, God is greater than all of those things, greater than the risk, greater than the fear, greater than those coming against you. But the last things that I want to challenge us with is seen in Nehemiah, is that nobody can take the first step for you. Nobody. We're sitting here today, and everybody is considering, this is my brokenness. I can't take that first step for you. Your wife or your husband, your mom or your dad, your kids, your best friend, they can't take that step for you. At some point in time, renewal is only possible when you initiate the first step. And man, it feels risky. Man, it feels risky. There are moments in my life where I had to face some brokenness, and I'm thinking, what are people going to think? What about the fallout? What about all this stuff? And it's overwhelming. And finally just laying it before God and saying, God, you're greater than this. Without you, I have no hope, but with you, I have ultimate hope. Isn't that seen in the life of Jesus? Our restoration, the pathway to get there for Jesus was brutal. It was painful. It was overwhelming. But what it accomplished was eternal. It was incredible. We have no hope without him. He is our perfect example. We need to also be willing to walk the pathway of renewal. The destination is beautiful. The pathway is painful. But it's worth it. Nobody, my friend, can take the first step for you. So take the first step and put your brokenness before the Lord today. My prayer is that this church is a place where renewal happens. This is a place where we can feel okay and safe. That we're not spectacles to each other when we're seeking renewal. We are cheerleaders for each other. Because we all, every one of us, no matter who you are or where you are, we all need renewal. We all have brokenness. And if you have just found healing in your brokenness, you're going to face some brokenness again. That is life. We live in a broken world, we have broken relationships, and we are broken people. But we have the healer, the God that is greater than all of it, that wants to meet us and help us through this. Initiate. Take the first step and step into those broken places and let God do his good work. So, Father, we commit this to you. Very specifically, Father, by the power of your Spirit, speak to people today. Empower them today like you did Nehemiah to begin to step into these broken places, to have conversations where there's all kinds of fear surrounding it, to make things known that there's all kinds of fear about what are people going to think. God, break those walls down and begin to do your good work here. Because you are greater than the risk we will take. You are greater than the fear that we face. You are greater than those things that come against us. You are greater. And so we give you these moments. We ask these things in the name of